Welcome to Who's That Pokémon, the most in-depth Pokémon anime rewatch podcast on the entire internet. If you didn't know, this is a retrospective look back on the Pokémon anime series, episode by episode from the very beginning. This show has been airing for over 20 years now and has over 1,000 episodes, yet it somehow gets neglected a bit by Pokémon fans, so I thought it was about time I got a podcast entirely dedicated to it. Today's episode is the 12th episode of the Indigo League series titled Here Comes the Squirtle Squad. The Japanese title is Enter the Zenigami Squad. This episode first aired on June 17, 1997 in Japan and on September 23, 1998 in the United States. On this day in Pokemon history for the Japanese air date, it's Koichi Yamadera's birthday. He's had a lot of huge roles in anime in general, but in Pokemon he played the humble role of Farfetch'd in So Near Yet So Far-Fetched. We also had on this day Pokédex 3D being released in Japan, which I didn't mark down the year, but if I was going to hazard a guess, I would say maybe 2012. I remember it was like the first Pokemon related thing that I had on my 3DS, and I mean it was just a Pokédex like character model viewer, but I was hungry for Pokemon on the 3DS, so I spent far too much time looking at these models. On this day in Pokemon history for the American air date, we've got a whole lot going on here. Firered and Leafgreen were released in Australia in 2004, which are obviously the very first remakes of the Kanto region. And at the time, this was sort of my falling out of Pokemon for the very first time phase. For some reason, I just sort of disconnected a little bit from Pokemon with the release of Gen 3 and Firered and Leafgreen. I don't know, I wasn't interacting with the fandom as much anymore. And it wasn't kind of a sort of, I'm not really into Pokemon anymore, I'm kind of over it. It was more just like, it sort of just faded out there. It was always there. I was always sort of hovering around the show. Like, I kept playing the games, and I'll go back and play like Crystal on my Game Boy Color, and I was still occasionally catching episodes of the Hoenn saga in the anime, but yeah, I just dropped out a little bit, and as a result, I don't have that extremely strong connection to Firered and Leafgreen. Speaking of not having a strong connection, Pokepark Wii Pikachu's Adventure was released in Australia in 2010, and that's one of the Pokemon games that I've never played. I had a Wii, so I didn't really have much of an excuse to not pick it up, but I just always saw the Pokepark games as kind of aimed at a bit of a younger demographic, and I never really saw much of a reason to play them. But I will admit, I have heard kind of sporadic positive comments about them, so I mean, I'll get to them one day, I'm sure, and hopefully it lives up to that sort of billing that I've heard from other fans. Finally, the first two episodes of the Black and White anime premiered in Japan, also in 2010, and funnily enough, this was sort of in my weird high school phase where I kind of like wanted to be, I thought doing sort of the lesser known things would make me kind of cool and unique. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to start watching the Pokemon anime in Japanese as it airs. So I started watching it subbed. And yeah, I watched like the first maybe like 7 or 8 episodes in Japanese with English subtitles. And I think I was probably like on the school holidays or something, like I binge watched it. And then I just never kept up with it. And eventually I watched like the first 2 seasons, I think, of Univa in English. So that plan clearly backfired quite quickly. The screenplay for this episode was written by Hideki Sonoda. This is his second episode after previously writing Challenge of the Samurai, and Sonoda is actually the last of this current batch of writers to have written multiple episodes, so he got there in the end. It's a long time between episodes, between Challenge of the Samurai and then this episode, but yeah, he finally got it, and we've basically, as I've mentioned previously, batch of writers we have now is basically like the core group of writers that we're going to be seeing episodes written by for the foreseeable future, yeah. The debuts in this episode, we have no human main character or recurring character debuts here. However, we do have a couple Pokemon debuts. We have Ash's Squirtle, obviously, and the Squirtle Squad in general. And you could probably guess the Who's That Pokemon for this episode is Squirtle. So, with all of that said and done, it's time to jump into our episode summary and discussion. This episode kicks off with Ash, Misty and Brock walking down the road when they fall into a pit yet again. A quintet of Squirtle wearing sunglasses peer into the hole, laughing. Ash angrily climbs out of the hole and checks his Pokédex for details on the Squirtle. He orders Pikachu to use a Thunder Shock on them, but one of the Squirtle takes the hit for one of the Squirtle that seems to be the leader of the gang. A battle ensues, but Officer Jenny's arrival scares the Squirtle away.
With my very own Squirtle, Gary will never beat me! Go, Pikachu!
So this episode actually kicks off with a recap, which a lot of the early episodes are doing this. I feel like probably 90% of the episodes I've watched so far have had some sort of recap, which is kind of fair enough. A lot of plot is really happening, and a lot of main story progression is kind of happening here. Ash catching a lot of Pokemon and beating gyms pretty constantly, so it does sort of make sense. But yeah, they start this episode with a recap, and it shows Ash catching both Bulbasaur and Charmander, which, if we didn't already realize, based on the trends here, it kind of just confirms that Ash is going to catch Squirtle in this episode. Like, he's just caught the other two starters, and they're reminding you about it, so he's definitely catching the Squirtle that I mentioned in the episode title. In the dub, Ash is walking along, humming along to the music, which is a little bit strange. I don't know, they do occasionally have these like weird fourth wall breaking moments with Ash, and they always stick out like a sore thumb, to me at least. I mentioned the pitfall. Pitfall traps have been just a huge feature of these last 3 episodes, and I don't know if it was deliberate or they got lazy, or I don't know what it is. But yeah, they've been utilised 3 different times throughout the last 3 episodes, and each time the pitfall has been completely different. There was the Bulbasaur episode. The pitfall was actually set up as a sort of a protective measure. It wasn't sort of a antagonistic setup. Then Team Rocket digs a pit towards the end of Charmander the Stray Pokemon. And then in this one, it's a pit dug by the Squirtle Squad. So each time it's a different member. It's not just Team Rocket rehashing the same sort of setup 3 times in a row. When the gang falls into the pit, we actually see some animal remains in the ground, and it kind of sort of looks like a dinosaur skeleton. It's another example of the writers. I don't know if it would have been a writer inclusion. Maybe it was probably just from the animation side of things, but they're really referencing real-life Pokemon. Real-life animals, and that's something they obviously steer clear of to a really emphasized degree in as the show progresses. But here there's just got no problem referencing animals, which I don't know, it's surely they could have seen that kind of coming to bite them. The question would be, where are the animals? You don't see them anywhere, so what's the go? We've already got our first error here. After escaping the hole, Brock says that he landed on his head, even though it's shown that he was actually the only one of the trio that didn't land on his head, which bit of a mistake there. One thing I did notice when the Squirtle Squad popped up for the first time, the Squirtle Squad, they just all have really weirdly shaped heads, except for Ash's Squirtle, who has the normal shaped sort of Squirtle head, the stereotypical Squirtle head. But the rest of them, and I assume they've done this to sort of differentiate them, but they all just have weirdly shaped heads. They're not perfectly round, and they're not oval. They're just really odd. They've been dropped on their head one too many times. So yeah, I don't know if I actually really ever paid that much attention to it in the past, but it's something that really stuck out to me here. As I mentioned in the little recap of the start of the episode, one of the Squirtle Squad members actually takes a bullet for the leader, which made me laugh quite a bit. Trivia here, the English dub of this episode, in a different way to Challenge of the Samurai, actually implies Gary chose a Squirtle as his starter Pokemon, by having Ash mention that with his very own Squirtle, he would be able to beat Gary. Interesting to note that there were little signs that he chose Squirtle, but it wouldn't probably be revealed until the Silver Conference. And this mention sort of about having his very own Squirtle, he can beat Gary, that was actually added into the dub. It's not in the original version. So I wonder if the dubbers actually, they knew that Gary had picked a Squirtle. Because, I mean, you can take that line and you could take it both ways. You could say it as Ash being like, whoa, Gary has a Squirtle. If I get my own Squirtle, I'd be able to beat him. But also it could just be Ash going, oh, wow, a Squirtle, that's a starter Pokemon. That's a pretty rare and powerful Pokemon. If I have this, I'll be able to beat Gary, and it's not really talking about his starters. Yeah, it would be interesting to find out whether they knew that Gary has a Squirtle, because, like I said, you don't find out that he has that until the Silver Conference, which is ages away, literally years and years away. I really need to know how Jenny even knew that trouble was going down in this episode, or the start of this episode. They're in the middle of a field, or sort of like a rural path, with no sign of civilization around. But as soon as sort of a fight starts going down, she comes blaring out of nowhere. Like, is she just watching with binoculars, or like how could she possibly know what was going on here? And a little fun fact about Officer Jenny, this episode is the episode that establishes that there are multiple Officer Jennys who, much like the Nurse Joys, are all part of a large extended family, which we could have probably just sort of presumed that was the case after they did that with Nurse Joy, but this is actually the first time we get official confirmation that they're all related. So at the police station, Jenny explains that the group of Squirtle that they met earlier called the Squirtle Squad. She feels sympathy for them as they were abandoned by their trainers and all they do is run wild and play pranks on everyone. Meanwhile, Team Rocket is accosted by the Squirtle Squad, tied to a tree, and all of their food is stolen and eaten. Taking advantage of the Squirtle's mistrust of humans, Meowth tricks them into helping with Team Rocket's latest plan to finally steal Pikachu. Elsewhere, Misty is fishing while Ash and Brock lie on the riverbank. One of the Squirtle Squad members pops up and soaks them with a water gun. Ash, tired of the Squirtle Squad's antics, confronts the Squirtle when it jumps out of the water. Pikachu charges to attack, but the Squirtle withdraws into its shell and tackles him down, knocking Pikachu into the water where it's attacked by a wild Goldeen.
Let's show these little creeps.
I'm game.
Ah!
Oh no! They're eating all the jelly donuts and eclairs!
They're drinking all the lemonade!
This is cruel and unusual!
So when Jenny tells the group about the Squirtle Squad, they sort of show a few little flashbacks of the wacky hijinks that the Squirtle Squad get up to as they terrorize the town. And one of the activities the Squirtle is shown doing is stealing fruit from a fruit vendor. And this man actually really closely resembles the Magikarp salesman who would appear officially 3 episodes later when he would really take advantage of naive young James. But yeah, it's interesting to know that they've sort of got that design right here for a random sort of cutaway gag. There's also a dub edit here. The dub makes it seem as though the Squirtle Squad called themselves the Squirtle Squad, whereas the original implied that it was the townspeople who gave them the name. Also, Ash seems surprised that they were abandoned when in the original he states, "not again," which is sort of a reference, sort of a fourth wall, well not a fourth wall, but sort of a reference to him having to rescue an episode just prior. So yeah, kind of playing off that, and yeah, that didn't make it through in translation. So there's a lot going on when the mischievous Squirtle Squad meet up with the equally mischievous Team Rocket, but the absolute worst thing to come out of it is that James, well, they're talking about their meal plans, as Team Rocket often does, and James immediately drops down my character rankings when he said that he's sick of eating pizza for every meal. They say that like it was such a bad thing. Like, you're probably gonna get sick of pizza if you're having it for every meal, but that's not too bad. They're living not too bad. They're making it out like they're kind of hard up for cash, but pizza for every meal, like, I think that's still probably a decent step up from, like, I don't know, like, there have to be a lot cheaper meals underneath pizza. Like, they could just be eating rice every meal. I'm sure that would be extremely cheaper. I did think it was quite nice seeing Team Rocket fall prey to a pitfall trap set up by someone else, seeing them get their comeuppance from it's their patented trap, so seeing them fall prey to it it did get a little kick out of me. I also think this is the first time that we see rice balls being referred to as jelly donuts. When the Squirtle Squad steal Team Rocket's food basket, I think it's a picnic basket from memory, they start eating one of the rice balls and it's referred to as a jelly donut. Well, it's not specifically referred to as a jelly donut. It's sort of shouted out like, hey, they're eating our jelly donuts. And one of the Squirtles is chowing down on a rice ball. So it's Far less noticeable than other examples, but just completely blatant. But yeah, I think this is the birth of the infamous jelly donut. Finally, Goldeen sneaking up on that Pikachu booty is an all-time Pokemon anime moment. I suggest you go back and watch it if you haven't. When Pikachu gets sort of sent into the water, that Goldeen is full, like there's an extensive shot of it just like honing in on Pikachu's ass and then eventually goring him straight in the butt. Ash yells for Pikachu to swim to shore, though he cannot outswim the Goldeen. Pikachu gets hurt by Goldeen's horn and knocked out of the water. Ash runs to his friend's side, but 3 of the Squirtle quickly tie him up, along with Misty and Brock. Later, the 3 of them are tied to a rock in a cave, with Pikachu in a cage nearby. Meowth taunts Ash about Team Rocket's plans. Ash tries to appeal to the Squirtle not to believe Meowth, but Meowth retaliates and refutes everything Ash says to keep the Squirtle on Team Rocket's side. Brock notices that Pikachu is in bad shape and that they need to heal him. The Squirtle reluctantly accept Ash's pleas to retrieve medicine. They release Ash and threaten to dye Misty's hair if he doesn't return in time. Ash then sprints to a nearby rope bridge, but of course, it's a rope bridge, it breaks, causing him to fall into the water below and receive a horn attack from a Goldeen for himself.
But we don't have any super potion. What can we do?
A shop in town sells it.
In town? Squirtle Squad, please, you've got to let me go into town. If I don't get the medicine, Pikachu's in a lot of trouble.
Squirtle, 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 Squirtle.
They know you humans are just trying to get away.
Trust me, I won't run away. As soon as I buy the medicine, I'll come back, I promise.
A bit of a weird trivia here. This is the first time Ash has ever deliberately hurt a Pokemon biting Meowth on the tail, which kind of plays straight into my next point, which that bite on the tail results in him getting scratched, and it just always looks so brutal when Meowth delivers a scratch to someone. I've always loved how they deliver it, just the sharp lines across the face and then the facial expressions. Every time, I think Meowth's scratch as a kid was the move in the anime where I was like, that looks like the most painful thing in the universe. Like, just imagining how deep and deadly that cut is. Like, and obviously they're fine 2 seconds later, but just the way that they go about showcasing it on screen, I've always loved it. This is really the first example of the show using the "oh no, we're stuck somewhere remote and one of us is very sick" plot device, which gets used a ton in the show. Just off the top of my head, there's like the episode where they need the Salvia weed. They just constantly go back to the well of, oh, we're traveling and we're in the middle of a forest and one of us is sick. And no, 2 of us are sick, so one of us has to make the arduous journey to get the medicine that cures everything. It's something they use quite often. And I mean, when you've been around as long as Pokemon has been around, you're bound to start reusing plots. And honestly, it's one of the more interesting plots for them to reuse, I guess. I don't know, I kind of do like that framework of an episode. We've got another dub edit here. In the dub, the Squirtle Squad threatens to dye Misty's hair purple, while in the original, they actually threaten to execute her. In the same scene, Misty's reaction to the threat was changed to her threatening Meowth in regards to dyeing her hair purple. In the original, she actually said that she would get the super potion for Pikachu herself, which, yeah, that's a pretty major change. Executing her, that's pretty brutal. And it takes the Squirtle Squad from seeming like, oh, they're just jokesters, and sort of, they're not really someone to be intimidated by, into like a serious threat. I do know later on, kind of spoiling later on, but it's revealed that the Squirtle Squad were just bluffing. But even using execution as the bluff rather than like, oh, we'll just dye your hair, it's a bit extreme. When Ash sprints off after he's released on bail to go and get the medicine, he trips over a rock that is just like, he's running down a completely empty path, and then he trips over this lone rock in the middle of the path, which it's so unnecessarily dramatic. I don't understand what the point was. Like, he trips over it for like half a second, he's like, ow, and then he's like, no, I have to keep going, and I've got to do this for Pikachu, which you could have had him say those exact same lines, like, oh, I've got to do this for Pikachu, whatever, while he was running. He didn't need to trip over, and I felt like it was just so unnecessary. And as you might recall, if you listened to my Bulbasaur and the Hidden Village episode, this is the second time in 3 episodes that Ash has had to encounter a rickety rope bridge. So they're actually reusing a few plot devices and moments in this trio of episodes. Ash eventually makes it to the nearest town. There, he is knocked out when Gary slams a shop door into him and wakes up the next day to overhear Team Rocket holding up the store. Jesse and James make a successful getaway with their stash aboard the Meowth balloon. Before Ash can chase them down, he attempts to get a super potion, though the townspeople pull their guns on Ash. Officer Jenny intervenes, which gets him out of that temporary trouble. Ash then manages to obtain the medicine and gets a ride back to the cave with Officer Jenny.
It's Team Rocket! I've got to get back before they get Pikachu! Oh. Super potion, please! Oh, no, I don't need a new gun. Don't shoot me, please! Stop!
Drop those! He's not with Team Rocket!
So we've got to start off with the obvious one here. I forgot all about Gary smacking Ash in the face with the door. Yeah, it caught me off guard. I've seen this episode quite a lot. I had Indigo League season on DVD when I was in high school. And when you're a high school student, you don't really have a lot of money. You don't really have luxury to kind of just pick and choose whatever media you want to consume. So when you get that box set DVD, you watch it over and over again. So I've seen this episode a lot, and somehow I forgot that Gary appears here. This is actually Gary's second appearance, I think, off the top of my head. Which, yeah, it's such a random moment, but I think it's also such a cool moment, especially when you're not expecting it. You're like, oh, bang, Ash just got knocked the hell out, which is funny in its own right. And then it's like, oh, it's Gary. And it's like a funny little sliding doors moment where you like, oh, Ash could have just encountered his hated rival, but instead he's knocked out. I really want to know, like, do you think Gary gets caught up in these wacky hijinks on his adventures? Like, Ash he's always getting caught up in something like this. You know, the Squirtle Squad have kidnapped him, and like, oh, now he's got to save the Charmander, and he's run into this hidden village where he's going to meet a Bulbasaur. Do you think Gary is having this same thing happen? Like, when he catches his Pokemon, is he having this weird-ass moment, or is he just really basic where it's just like, yeah, you know, I might walk out into a field today, might see what kind of Pokemon are out there, and I might catch them. It's just really weird to think that, like, maybe Ash is just drawn to all of these weird sort of characters and weird sort of situations. I think something that needs to be addressed more than that, though, is that Team Rocket is packing heat in this episode. They literally have guns here. It's just so bizarre. Like, I can't explain why this episode is fine, but Legend of Dratini isn't. Like, not only do Team Rocket, like, have bazookas and stuff, but the townspeople in the shop then pull guns on Ash. They literally aim them at Ash. So, like, why is that okay? But then the Legend of Dratini, I don't know why I'm struggling to say Dratini so much. Like, why is that one singled out as being, like, worthy of being banned? I can kind of see him being like, well, we can't ban the episode where he catches Squirtle because, like, he's catching a Pokemon here. But in Legend of Dratini, he does catch Tauros. And, like, I mean, maybe they had an inkling that Squirtle, like, maybe they'd been told that Squirtle was going to be... Actually, no, they would have had quite a fair chunk of the anime to go off of, I'd say. So they probably knew that Squirtle was going to be more important than Tauros. But still, it's so weird that they're like, no, let this episode with the guns stay, but the other episode with the guns and where Ash catches a Pokemon, that's got to go. There's actually a dub edit when it comes to Team Rocket's bazooka. So Team Rocket has a cherry blossom petal bazooka. That's like their ammunition here, sort of, I guess how they skate around it being pretty freaking insane that they have a bazooka. But in the dub, James said that he had filled it with ice, which creates just a weird moment where they shoot it and cherry blossoms come out, but like you said that there was ice in it. Like, what is going on here? It's just, yeah, it's not great. Another dub edit as well. While Jessie states that they are like supervillains in the comic books, except better looking, in the Spanish Latin American dub, she explicitly says that they are much more sexy. So hell yeah, that Latin American dub is just all about getting real horny about Jessie. Couple of pieces of trivia before we move on here too. This is the first episode that shows a town that's not featured in the games, and also during the scene when an exhausted Ash enters the town to get the super potion, there's actually a sign hanging from a store awning that says beer. So this episode's real risque, and just in general, it does seem like I get the vibe that they were sort of going for a little bit of an older audience with this. Like, we know now that after many, many, many years that the anime has been used mostly as like a sort of marketing tool towards the kids. It's a good way to introduce them to it and get them memorizing Pokemon and attached to different types of Pokemon. But yeah, at this point in time, it does seem like it's got something more for the older crowd, which, like, I feel like, yeah, they really moved away from it. Like, even the original Japanese dub these days, I don't think they do such extreme things like this, but I guess maybe that's because they're more conscious of it being dubbed, when at this point in time, the games hadn't even hit America, so it's like, they can't be like, they wouldn't really be having that in mind. With the bridge to town broken, Jenny and Ash find another way into the cave, but it's too narrow for an adult, so Ash has to go through it alone. However, he finds that everyone is actually gone from the cave, and he quickly races out to find Misty, Brock, and Pikachu completely unhurt. Apparently, the Squirtle were bluffing earlier. They may play tricks, but they would never do anything nasty. Pikachu is then promptly healed by Misty. Suddenly, Team Rocket announces their arrival with several explosions and their motto. They throw down a few more flash bombs and drop a ladder for Meowth to climb up with Pikachu, whom he nabs while everyone else was distracted by the bombs. As everyone runs for cover, Ash looks back and sees that the Squirtle Squad leader has fallen on its back and is unable to move. Ash quickly races back and dives on top of the Squirtle, protecting it from the ensuing explosions. Another pair of bombs are dropped and Ash tells the Squirtle to save itself. The Squirtle, however, lifts Ash up over its head and runs for the cave, saving both of them.
Hey, Squirtle. Are you okay?
Squirtle.
Here come two more! Save yourself, Squirtle. Run for it.
Squirtle!
So this is actually the very first episode where a potion is used in the anime, and in this case, the potion is a super potion, obviously, which is actually the most commonly used potion in future episodes, which is kind of strange that the middle potion is the potion that they go with most often. Like, you would assume, I feel like if I was the one in charge of the show and they're like, oh, we're going to have Pikachu get sick and it's going to get healed by one of the potions, I would probably just go with, like, the regular potion, which, like, yeah, they're just like, oh, we'll go with the middle one. And the fact that super potion has been the most prevalent one throughout the anime is just, yeah, it's a little quirky. Also, I feel like this is a pretty lesser known fact, but it's depicted as a spray bottle here, and this actually ends up becoming its sprite in Pokemon Firered and Leafgreen, and it continues on from then, and it actually keeps the same colors. So this is one of the rare times that the anime has actually inspired the games, which you don't see it that often, but yeah, they actually took their design of the potion and they're like, you know what, that's good enough to use. Yeah, I can't really think of many other examples of this. I think maybe, I was actually thinking of this randomly earlier, is Professor Oak's first name, was that given to him in Pokemon Forever? Like, I don't recall them ever actually naming him in the games. So, I assume that it came from Forever. Team Rocket begins celebrating early, but Ash interrupts them. Ash orders Squirtle to use its water gun, which blows a hole in Team Rocket's balloon, sending them blasting off, and Pikachu is saved. However, Team Rocket's attack started a fire that could potentially burn down the whole town. Fortunately, with Ash's command, the Squirtle Squad steps in and puts out the fire with their water-type attacks. Their heroism is commended, and Officer Jenny gifts the Squirtle Squad with a certificate and the title of the local firefighters, complete with a uniform. After this, Ash and his friends prepare to resume their journey. Misty then realizes that the Squirtle Squad boss is following them. Ash offers the Squirtle the opportunity to join his team. Squirtle happily accepts, removing its black glasses to reveal its eyes, and in the process, it jumps into Ash's arms.
Would you like to come along with us, Squirtle?
Squirtle. Squirtle.
Welcome to the team, Squirtle.
Squirtle.
Guess I've got a new Pokemon.
Pikachu.
Caught? What do you mean caught?
Oh, what's the difference? It's on our side now.
So I got a bit of beef with Officer Jenny here. What the hell do a bunch of Pokemon want with a certificate? Like, what are they going to do with that? They don't live in houses, they're Pokemon? Like, what, they're going to hang their certificate up on a cave wall or something? Like, come on. You couldn't have given them, like, some Poke food or something better than that? Like, you can't feed yourself with certificates and cool jackets, Jenny. This episode also marks the earliest point in a series when Ash has had a full party of 6 Pokemon on hand. It's taken him just 12 episodes, so he's got 6 Pokemon now, which means he's getting one every second episode, which is pretty incredible. And actually, the next episode, it's not going to slow down. He's going to get another Pokemon, which it's just absurd to think about how quickly he's getting all these Pokemon. And again, it goes back to something that I bring up constantly ad nauseum. They really do emphasize the gotta catch 'em all nature. Like, Ash is just constantly catching Pokemon. But yeah, that's the episode. Here comes the Squirtle Squad. What were my thoughts on the quality of the episode? Well, we actually have a new leader for my favorite episode so far. This episode is just a joy from start to finish, and honestly, even if I try as hard as I can, I still can't come up with a major negative here for this episode. The Squirtle Squad creates so many funny moments, and overall, this episode is actually really great on the comedic side of things. I love the idea of them using Meowth's ability to communicate effectively with both people and Pokemon as a means for Team Rocket to sort of enact a plan, and this is definitely an example of them being used to serve an actual purpose in an episode. So often they just throw in Team Rocket at the very last second. Like, literally go back one episode, they're thrown in at the very last second just to kind of make an appearance, and a sort of ham-fisted way to get Charmander to join Ash. But here, I think they're just used perfectly with the plot, and yeah, more episodes like this, please. This was actually probably the starter Pokemon episode I remembered the least, but after revisiting it, it's without a doubt the best in my opinion. So, recap of the major events of this episode. Ash and his friends meet the Squirtle Squad, and then the lead Squirtle of the Squirtle Squad follows Ash and joins his team. Very straightforward there. Ash Ketchum's trainer win-loss record is still 2 wins and 2 losses. No trainer battles in this episode, so his win-loss streak is still at 1 win. It's going to be still a couple more episodes until we arrive back at an episode featuring battles. But with that said, it's now time for some more trivia. Only 2 more pieces of trivia here. Most of it got spilled during the episode summary and discussion. The first is that this episode is featured on Volume 4 Squirtle from Viz Media's Pokemon All-Star series. And on a similar, but in my personal opinion, a much cooler note, this episode can be found on the 3rd Pokemon edition of Game Boy Advance Video. So, I don't know if you guys remember Game Boy Advance Video, but holy shit, I am so nostalgic for Game Boy Advance Video. Growing up, we had the Game Boy Advance Video the cartridge, I should say, that had Beach Blank Out Blastoise and Go West Young Meowth, which, as a result, that made Go West Young Meowth like such seared into my brain episode. And we also had the one that had it had part of the Johto Silver Conference. But yeah, Game Boy Advance Video was kind of a neat idea. Like, you only got 2 episodes, but I mean, as a kid, you definitely weren't complaining. Like, that was like the holy grail, especially because like in the mid 2000s, well, obviously like you're a little kid, so you don't really have any money to go out and buy like box sets, but box sets of the Pokemon series weren't a thing in Australia yet, and I'm not sure how prevalent they would have even been like in America. So getting something like this, it was like literally like gold. You're telling me I get 2 episodes of the Pokemon anime series that I can watch whenever I want. It was just, yeah, it was mind-blowing. It was kind of similar to the Video Now players that were making a run around in the mid-2000s. It's sort of the same vibe as that. But yeah, that's all of the trivia. So we move on to our Pokemail segment. And the question of the episode, rounding out the theme I started with Bulbasaur and the Hidden Village, what's your favourite Squirtle moment in the show? Personally, you're probably going to guess what it is, but I'm a big fan of the entire sequence where Ash and Co are trying to get to a new island in Mewtwo Strikes Back. I've always really loved how all of the shots look when they're under the water, and honestly, it's probably my favourite moment because I don't remember a whole lot of like iconic Squirtle moments. I think like the other one that comes to mind is the episode where it's in Orange Islands, and Squirtle goes to they come across like a firefighting school, and Squirtle sort of tries to keep up with the Pokemon that sort of do that day in and day out, which, I mean, it probably is burned into my brain because it's like early on the Orange Islands box set that I have, so I watched it a whole lot. But yeah, outside of those two, I can't really remember a whole lot of iconic Squirtle moments, which, I mean, it does hurt its chances of having more iconic moments than, say, like a Charizard when Squirtle doesn't get to evolve. But that basically does us for this episode. Thanks for listening to Who's That Pokemon? I really hope you enjoyed the show. If you're not already subscribed to the podcast, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube, pretty much any podcast service available. You can also find the show on Twitter at Who's That PKMM Pod, which will allow you to keep up with the latest updates for the show and my YouTube channel. And I'm also on Twitter as @SourceMarlow if you want to follow me. That's all for this week, or this episode I should say. I hope you join me again next time as I take a look back at Mystery at the Lighthouse. It's an extremely atmospheric episode which introduces us to Bill, the creator of the PC. It also shows us a Pokemon that kind of resembles Gigantamaxing. And if you thought Ash would take a break from catching Pokemon, you'd be wrong. As I mentioned, Ash catches a Krabby here.